I'm just going to give a really brief overview about the developments of parent participation in England, which you will all know about for your own forums. But obviously, you'll all be aware that in terms of the grant programme, you all have to send us those horrible monitoring forms that everybody hates. Or not everybody, hopefully, but that are arduous and long. And we really appreciate the huge amount of time and effort that people put into completing those. And what we wanted to do was to be able to report back to you what the findings of those monitoring reports are, because even though they are a real, we know they're a real challenge and sometimes an extra administrative burden for forums when you're already really busy and trying to do the participation activity you want to do. But actually, it's that evidence and information from you that helps us evidence to the department about the progress that's being made, about the huge benefits and outcomes of parent care participation, and ultimately which will help us, hopefully, in the future as we continue to have the discussions about how parent care forums are supported and resourced. As you'll all be aware, our support offer from Contact a Family changed when the new contract started in July, not last July, July before. And we changed to a different model where we had the advisor support, we had a learning and development offer, but then we also had more targeted support for forums where perhaps there were some particular difficulties or challenges where forums just need a little bit of extra support. So some forums will have been part of the forum-to-forum peer support programme, and some forums may have had some support from an associate if there's been a particular challenge or issue where just a little bit of support or help more directly was helpful. With the Pathfinder programme as well, the department also provided a very small amount of additional resource to support Pathfinder forums with associate support, just 2 days' worth of associate support to help them in whatever way was most useful to Pathfinders as they kind of tried to find their way through that whole process. So 17 different forums have accessed that Pathfinder support. Also, as part of our support via Contact Family, we work with the National Network of Parent Care Forums and offer some in-kind support to the national network. So, as I already said, we were able to finally do all of the collation from the monitoring forms. We had some that were submitted quite late last year, but obviously we were also still dealing with the impact of the previous year's very late grant. So we know that there were some particular issues which led to some of those challenges, but that in turn meant that we were delayed in being able to kind of collate some of those findings and summaries. So ultimately, we had to take the following data from 145 forums who returned their monitoring and with their comparable data from previous years. And you will find all of this information in this red document here. So please don't worry if you can't keep up with all the slides as we quickly whiz through. We were really, really pleased to see that despite the previous year's challenges where the grant had been really late, some forums didn't have their grant till November or December in that first year of the new grant round. And where we knew because of that delay, so for some forums hadn't had any resource for between 6 to 9 months, we were concerned that what we might see was a decreasing participation of parent carers in forums and perhaps not the development and growth that we might have ideally wanted to see. But what was really positive to see from the monitoring forms was actually there had been a lot of progress and an increase in lots of different areas. So we talked about in the new contract about wanting to support forums to work towards becoming parent-led forums where that was possible. We weren't saying every forum had to be parent-led. You know, there was lots of debate and discussion around that. But in terms of sustainability, and about ensuring that parents are in the driving seat of what's going on in forums, that we're really encouraging or supporting forums to think about that or think what that might look like for them. And we did see an increase in the number of forums that self-define themselves as being parent-led. What we also saw, and we're really pleased to see, was that despite the issues with the grant, the huge changes that had been seen in local authorities and turnover of staff and all of those other challenges that local parent carers faced and local forums faced, that there was still a growth in the number of parents that were linked to forums and the number of parent carers that were very actively involved in being part of steering groups or representing parent carers in strategic meetings. So despite all of those challenges, there was still growth, which I think says a huge amount for how committed people are to participation, but hopefully also in terms of the outcomes that are achieved by participation, that people can really see the benefit of that. We also asked forums about whether they got additional funding or not. What wasn't so easy to determine from that was, I think there are some forums that get additional funding, but that's to provide a specific service or support. And obviously that's a little bit different than forums who receive additional funding for their participation work. So the questions slightly changed in this year's monitoring grant. It's only very tiny change, but just to try and help us make that determination about how many forums are supported either by their local authority or health or by other funding, and which forums aren't. We also asked, and again I know that for some forums this was a new line of questioning in terms of the monitoring, was around the reach of forums. And what we'd hoped was that although these were new questions in the form, that it wasn't about us trying to make things more difficult, but it was just about us trying to gather that evidence base which helps us to be able to evidence that actually forums do have a strong reach or are clear about what their reach is or where the challenges are, and also helping us to think about then how we can try and support that if there are particular challenges in some areas. So that was really helpful and useful data. And some forums replied and said, well, we hadn't really thought about it before, but we're beginning to think about it now. And that's really great as well. We asked the question about the working relationship with the stakeholders. And you probably won't be surprised to see some of the differences there are there around how forums, again, self-described their participation, kind of working relationships with the different stakeholders. And we also asked this question about involvement and participation and co-production of the short break statement. And this was a really important question for us because the short breaks duty had obviously been introduced, which gave a very clear directive about working with local parent carer forums to develop short break statements. But the response was clearly that that hadn't been something that had been followed through in every local area with every parent carer forum. So it was a useful way for us to talk with our colleagues in the Department for Education about the new legislation, and particularly thinking about the local offer and what that might mean, and how even in the short break duty, when we had that requirement, it still didn't seem to quite be working in the way we would have expected it to. And we needed to learn from that as we move towards the local offer information. So then you were all asked to tell us about your outcomes, and you were all asked to tell us about your greatest achievement. And the Department for Education have received all of those from you all, and a huge pile of evidence and information was included there, and it was just amazing to see. Because we didn't want you to go home with a huge brick, what we've done for the report actually is just taken one example from each region about the outcomes that they've achieved, and then a different example from each region about the greatest achievements. So that is in the back. It is anonymised, but all of the information that you've said is there. And they're just really awe-inspiring kind of accounts to read, really, and to see what huge achievements have been made by parent carers in local areas. But we know that this is still a challenging time for forums. There is that evidence of growth, but we know that we're moving into new times where there perhaps are some additional challenges and pressures, both for individual families, for service restructures, and then in the mix of all that, we've got the new SEND reforms, as well as other reforms outside of that, which have huge implications for disabled children and their families.